Welcome back to Is It Worth It Reviews. Today I'm not going to talk about a whole product like a DAC amp or anything like that, but about something that's used for tuning and upgrading your products, and that's op amps. In this case, Burson V7 Vivid Pro Dual version. I'll be testing these in the Geshelli Labs J2S unit. And this S stands for socketed, meaning that it is very convenient for you to just open it. And we have one op-amp socket for single-ended output, and then two sockets for balanced outputs. So you don't need to solder anything, you just have to put the correct orientation and click these in. And the correct orientation for V7 Vivids is that you will see this indentation on one side that is opposite from the naming and branding. So the part where it says V7V Dual is not that part. The other side has this archy indentation, and then you just follow that same look on the socket and you align them and you're good to go. Be careful about that, because if you turn it around, it will fit, it will go in, but that can damage the op amp or even your device. So when you do something like this, be careful, be patient, do it slowly and check everything twice. And for the purpose of this comparison, I'll be also using the default Geshelli Labs op amp. It's Texas Instruments OPA 1656. And something that is much more price appropriate, Sparkos 3602. And this one is $85 a piece, which I believe is the exact same price for Burson V7 Vivid. And while I do have some other op amps with me here, like Burr Browns or Muses 01, etc., I have like 5 or 6 of them. Comparing all of these with Burson V7 would be a very long and tedious task, but more important than that, I didn't find that any of these could actually match what Burson is doing except Sparkos, so I think that one more affordable default version like this OPA 1656 is a good starting point to give us some nice bass. Then we'll talk about Burson and Sparkos and how they compare. And to give you that bass, that intro, I'll start by saying the Geshelli Labs J2S, when you buy it by default for 479 or something like that US dollars, is a very, very good sounding DAC with its Texas Instruments default op amps that you don't have to pay extra for. It's a very natural sounding DAC, it has very good tonality, and it's definitely one of the best DACs around 500 US dollars on the market at the moment. If you want to know more about it, I made a review dedicated to the DAC itself. But being that good makes it a good polygon for testing good op amps. And also having these sockets so you can just use your hand and switch them, no soldering required, is another great thing. So I started this listening, refreshing my memory, how does it sound with the default op amps. And as I said, it sounded good, it sounded neutral. You would not find anything really wrong with its sound in isolation. There's plenty of details, tonality is good, it's full, it's quite lush and rich too, and has enough smoothness. It's a very enjoyable sounding DAC. But then I pulled out Texas Instruments and I switched to Burson V7 Vivid. And by the way, they are fully broken in, several hundred hours just in case. And what I noticed immediately is that Burson V7 Vivid made the background darker. Now it made that sort of vacuum clean background behind the tones and the instruments. And because of that, those same tones sounded cleaner and crisper, and they jumped out more from that darkness. And one thing that you'll quickly notice with V7 Vivids is how actually alive and snappy those tones sound. It's dynamically very lively sounding amp. And as I said, these OPA 1656, they sound good themselves too. But the edges of tones with 1656 are not as clearly and crisply defined as with V7 Vivid. And the bass line feels almost bloated. It's just not as defined and as quick as with Vivids that have that really impactful, really punchy, but really tight and well-controlled bassline. And that difference might not be as noticeable if you're listening to some simple songs and simple recordings. For example, these beautiful female vocals that do very slow and simple covers of famous songs that artists much better than themselves written. If you listen to something like that, you'll be like, wow, both of these sound great. But as soon as things get tough and crowded and there's a lot of things happening in the recording, you'll notice that Burson makes sense of everything better. It separates, it outlines, it makes more empty space and keeps the sound staging more organized and pinpointed better than TI 1656. So with a busy song, when listening 1656 directly after Burson, I was reminded of like three fat people sitting on the airplane next to each other in a really narrow seats. And you know, like everything is spilling out just a little bit and they're fighting for space and there's not much of empty gaps between those big people. And then when you listen to the same song with V7 Vivids, suddenly the seats seem to be a little bit wider and people sitting in it are fitter. There's like empty space actually between the shoulders of those people and they do not seem cramped together but separated well enough. And when it comes to dynamics, it's a very similar story. 1656 is a little bit slower and sluggish. It doesn't move with intent, like Burson, that is much more muscly and ready and punchy. So to sum it up quickly, with Burson op amps, Geshelli Labs DAC sounds like it has a cleaner, darker background and also cleaner, tidier tones that are more jumpy, more explosive, just crisper, they have greater dynamics, and they're tonally neutral. So in this case, I had a clear preference towards Burson V7 Vivid, and that was it. But much more fair competition was actually Sparkos SS3602. And Sparkos also are an improvement in terms of detailing and how tidy everything sounds and how spacious it sounds compared to 1656. When you compare them directly to Burson, there are some differences in the way they present music. I would say that tonally speaking, both of them could be called neutral, and I don't seem to notice much of like frequency spectrum deviation. I cannot say that either one of these is particularly brighter or bassier or darker in that obvious kind of way. But there's more to it than the obvious tonality. So Sparkos sounds more relaxed in a way. It has like calmer presentation and it's a bit softer around the edges. If anything, it sounds slightly brighter to my ears, and that especially goes in that upper mid-range as I perceive it. So some tones like husky textures are going to be more pronounced with Sparkos, but not in any sort of aggressive way. It's bright, it sounds open in terms of that tone texturing, but it's actually very natural sounding. The Burson sounds a bit more focused and crisper, not as textury as Sparkos, but the edges of tones, tone outlines and their separation feels cleaner. And dynamics, that kick factor, that engaging factor is also higher with Burson. And the background seems darker, so it felt like V7 Vivid had slightly deeper sound staging to my ears because of the dark vacuum-like background, while Sparkos had slightly shallower, more pushed forward, still great depth of the soundstage, just not as great as Burson's. But on the other hand, individual tones felt slightly bigger and slightly more diffused. Less crisp, less outlined, but more diffused. And I know that some people would prefer that and some would prefer Burson's. For me personally, I started listening to some sort of fast-paced music. I started my test with these op amps, listening some electronic music, and then I switched to some sort of rock and roll like ZZ Top. And with that kind of music that is all about engagement, about rhythm, about being alive and luring you in to tap with the rhythm. And when you listen to that kind of music and you are imagining concerts and having good fun and being alive, Burson does sound a bit better and more appealing and more alive to my ears. But maybe in like 3 out of 10 songs, I actually preferred Sparkos. And those are kind of songs that have really like a low-key, jazzy kind of music with beautiful husky or sandy vocals like Nina Simone or Billie Holiday or Norah Jones if I want something that is not like 100 years old. So if you're not thinking about concert and alive kind of music, but something that you can imagine your older parents listening with a glass of wine on a record player and enjoying like late in the evening, I kinda preferred Sparkos for those kinds of recordings. But I do think that when I look at the music in general and all of the possible genres, that Burson will actually have the advantage and will be preferred by most of you in most of the genres. It sounds more technically perfect, more dynamic, more alive, and just cleaner. So if you like tinkering, if you like tuning your sound towards your own preferences, pulling small levers and turning small knobs, tinkering with op amps is a very fun and interesting thing to do because they sometimes can bring more of a difference than, for example, a whole DAC chip itself. Just be aware that my personal impression using this particular DAC or some other reviewer's impression using some other sort of, I don't know, headphone amplifier or anything like that might not be your own. Because in a different device with a different set of characteristics and different tonality, you might prefer one or the other. So it's on you to decide in which way would you like to nudge your whole hi-fi setup. What qualities would you like to emphasize? Because no component is perfect, and even though these are mighty good op amps, you actually might prefer something else. So having that in mind, Burson V7 Vivids are one of the best op amps that I've personally heard, and I think that they can be highly recommended to tinkerers. That would be all for today, guys. Thank you for watching. See you next time.